So I'm going to jump right in. Our next presenter is Paul Egan, the Growth Marketing Manager at Mursion. And a little bit about Paul before he officially kicks off his session. Paul is responsible for finding innovative new ways to share immersion with leaders who are at the front of the adoption curve. Paul has spent more of his career helping companies transform their organizations and improve employee engagement. He is passionate about creating workplaces where leaders are champions of empathy, inclusion, and service. So today, Paul will be discussing how to employ emotional intelligence for more equitable conversations during promotions. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Paul to the stage. Hi, Paul.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Well, we have a wonderful group here, so I'm going to tell everyone, post your questions in the Q&A. We'll get them to you, Paul, by the end of your session. And with that, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Excellent. So hello, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about how organizations are meeting the pressures to commit to their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Despite increased investment and maybe a few Instagram posts, the road to an equitable workplace has remained slow at times. Companies can be hyper-focused, hiring more diverse employees and teaching their employees the proper language to have equitable conversations. However, what we've found at Mursion is that growing that sort of the end part of DEI and B, the inclusion and belonging process can be slow and hard. So over the next half hour, we're going to walk through a few of the steps that we've seen companies take to make a difference and how experiential learning is playing its part. So first, I'd like to go over immersion. I'd like to go over sort of who I am and sort of why I'm speaking with you guys. And then we can talk about a few of the big and small steps that companies are taking to improve their own diversity, equity, and inclusion. From there, we'll transition and hone in on one of those aspects of those steps and talk about how experiential learning and behavioral change is really being applied to that. And then we're going to go into a demonstration where I guess we can put our money where our mouth is and have a few, and then open up for Q&A after that. So who are we? If you haven't heard of Immersion, why are we here? So Immersion is the commercial outgrowth of a nearly decade of research and development from the University of Central Florida, where researchers developed a groundbreaking mixed reality simulator for training teachers and school leaders. Since then, we have expanded since 2014, we've expanded to successfully provide hundreds of thousands of avatar-based simulations across the globe. We do leadership training, customer service, but we do a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion training. And I would say over half of our 150 active customers are working in diversity, equity, inclusion training. And sort of the part that Mursion plays, and sort of we can talk about this later a little bit, and in this world is in being accountable for our own diversity, equity, inclusion principles is choosing good partners to work with. I mean, not every company we work with that or speak with that wants to do diversity, equity, inclusion training is the right partner. You know, we can speak to we've spoken to school systems where they want to practice simulations with students, and the only bad students are students of Hispanic descent. And we have decided not to work with those people. We can work with large financial institutions where their chief human resources officer will talk about their racism problem, but only ever refer to it with air quotes around it. And so how does Immersion as a partner respond to these? And normally, we say, I'm sorry, we can't work with you. But the good news is we have a lot of great partners. And when we look at what makes those partners great, we see a few trends. And one is, I think was harped on a little bit from our keynote speaker that we just had, is that diversity and inclusion starts with the big picture. It starts with demonstrated executive commitment. It starts with hiring a chief diversity officer, corporate-wide access to resources and trainings. Diversity and inclusion is not just some opt-in part of the culture. It is ingrained, it is focused on, and there is a concerted effort from the executive leadership team to transform their culture into becoming an inclusive workplace. But as a lot of us know, even with all of these large steps, it can die in the frontline leadership. It can die at the ground level. And so I'd like to focus in on the call out and call in tactics that Mursion has sort of been implementing and helping companies work with a little bit later. Oh, and I just realized I'm not sharing my screen. Let me share my screen. Thank you for bringing it up in chat. Does everyone see this?
Looks good, Paul.
Okay, great. So the DEI starts with the big picture, and the DEI dies in the day-to-day. So when we're calling out, and so we're going to focus in on this call out and call in focus of the work that Mursion is doing, but it extends beyond that, by creating allyship programs, holding, we talked about accountability and holding not only our leaders accountable for the DEI work that they're doing, but holding our frontline leaders and ourselves accountable for our DEI work and recognizing unconscious bias. So call in versus call out is a tactic that Mursion has been using in a lot of the simulations that we do. The call out culture can be a little controversial. I'm sure if you tune into the news on a weekly basis, you'll see somebody claiming that cancel culture is breaking the fabric of America. But at Mursion, we believe there's actually a really important use for calling out. And the need for call out is when we need to stop someone from preventing further harm. By allowing someone to either micro or macro aggress, we are allowing these systems of oppressions to exist and allowing somebody to create further harm than they need to. And it can actually be a saving grace to sort of step in and stop that, and stop it in its tracks before more harm is done. The challenge is this can be really hard to do. And a lot of our learners struggle finding the courage or being ready to sort of put themselves in those situations, especially if there's a power imbalance. And so we also like to pair that with what we call the call-in culture, which is, if you're giving examples of sort of calling out, you're making statements saying that's not our culture here, those aren't our values. But call in is when you sort of open up the floor to the other person to explain themselves, and sort of using it as a learning opportunity. And maybe that's, you take them aside, you sort of get to explain there, but it's where culture can be built, but can also, especially as a power imbalance, be a really challenging step for someone to make. So the question that Mursion asks is, how do we prepare our coworkers with the courage to do the right thing? And there are several ways companies can go about doing this. They can do sort of more passive learning, like self-paced online learning and watching videos. And this prepares learners with sort of the necessary vocabulary to use, the necessary language to use. And then there's more experiential learning programs like role-playing, coaching, sort of our in-person coaching, live virtual coaching. We can do a little less in-person coaching now, but was very popular, I guess, last March. Um, and this is sort of where immersion comes in. And we like to say we do sort of a blended approach of many of these. So what is immersion? Immersion is a human-in-the-loop simulation for essential skills. This means on one end, and what we'll see in a bit when we go into our demo, is we have a simulation specialist who is a real live actor somewhere in the world who is playing an avatar or a cartoon, if you like to call it that, if that sort of makes more sense. And they can play 1, 2, 3 avatars at a time and create really diverse and challenging conversations for learners to practice. Um, I can answer sort of more questions about this later, but I'd love to sort of hop into the demo as soon as we can. But the reason why we've chosen avatars is, when I harked back to those 10 years of research and development we did at the University of Central Florida, is we did a study with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that found that in 4 sessions of immersion or really great experiential learning, learners change their behavior. Either whether they feel more confident or they sort of realize the steps that they need to take to be good advocates in their community. A good experiential learning practice makes those processes easier and gives people the courage to sort of speak up and speak out and sort of be good allies and advocates within their community. Without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to let our simulation specialist sort of bring it up, and we're going to go into the next part of our session.
Hello, my name is Bennett. Can you see and hear me okay, Paul? Yes, please refresh, have a
Thank you.
beverage.
Yeah, just a little bit of water. I'm well. How are you doing, Bennett?
I'm doing really good, thank you. So I'm your host avatar. I'm going to make sure that you have everything you need. What I'm going to do right now is share a slide with you. I'll read it out loud, see if you have any questions, okay?
Great, thank you.
Perfect. So you're going to be talking to Hugo and Maya there on the right about Denise Garcia, who's being considered for a promotion and is not in the room. You, Maya, and Hugo are on a panel considering her promotion. Denise is a strong critical thinker and team player who consistently goes above and beyond. These characteristics have been identified as important for consideration in the new role. Hugo has concerns. He's been with the company for many years, but has not worked directly with Denise. Maya has worked closely with Denise and believes a promotion is due. The desired outcome is you may witness a microaggression or two during this conversation. Identify the microaggressions and call in the microaggressor to address the situation in the moment. You can use intervention strategies like tune into your emotions, know how and when to regulate those, ask clarifying questions to better understand the perspectives of people in the room, assume great intent, but also focus on the impact of the microaggression. Do you have any questions about any of that?
No, I do not. Do you mind if I sort of just read over the desired outcomes one more time?
Please do. Yeah, go for it. Let me know when
Thank
you're
you.
ready.
Okay, I think I'm ready.
Okay, great. So, Paul, what's going to happen next? I will get you to your meeting with Hugo and Maya.
Mhm.
They can see you and hear you in real time. At any time, you can say pause. And when you do, I'll return, see if you need assistance, if you'd like to go to the reflection, or get back to the rest of the meeting. So let me ask you one thing. This is going to be more of an experience, so it's not going to be the complete meeting. How long did you want to go in there? I'll keep an eye on the time,
We could go
approximately.
for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So
Okay, great.
yeah,
So you can say pause, or I just will circle back at about, say, 7 minutes. So we have time to reflect if you
great,
haven't finished by then. Sound good?
great. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
Hey, Hugo. Hey, Paul. How are you?
Hey, Maya. I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing pretty good. What about you, Hugo?
I'm doing great. So nice to see you, Maya, Paul. So look, I understand we're here to discuss Denise Garcia's possible promotion. I
Yeah, we
haven't
are.
worked with her. Yeah, I haven't worked with her like Maya has, but I do have a couple concerns I'd like to bring up at this time.
Uh, so great. What I would like to do is, so the way I like to structure this is sort of let's talk about Denise Garcia. I'd like to hear more about what she's doing, what her current role is, and then let's go through positives. Then we can sort of get to concerns after that, if that makes sense. Does that work?
Um, sure. I mean, as long as there's room for me to voice these concerns, I think it's really important that I surface them.
Yeah, of course. So why don't you two sort of talk about your connections with Denise?
Sure.
Well, now I'm not sure. I mean, can I go first? What do you want to do here, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, Hugo, well, sort of what are the, I mean, why are we talking about Denise being up for promotion in the first place? You know, what are some of the leadership qualities that she's presented?
Yeah, well, as I understand it, I mean, part of why Denise was hired is, we're really trying to have diversity in thought. So I think that that's a piece of it.
Mhm.
Something that I've discovered, I know Maya's worked with her more, but I find her to be pretty aggressive.
Aggressive how?
Well, the most recent example I can think of, Maya was there. Denise was presenting at a meeting. She didn't smile. She was very direct. I found that to be very unpleasant. And then I had a question I wanted to ask. She wouldn't let me. I think I've worked here
Mhm.
longer than anyone. If I have a question or an insight, I should be allowed to surface it during presentation.
Maya, is this something that you saw as well?
Well, I was there.
Mhm.
My perspective on it is that Denise let us know at the top of her presentation, she had a lot of content. It was very high stakes, that she needed to get through it, and that she would take questions at the end. It seemed to me that she did indeed answer your questions at the end. Hugo, would you agree?
Mm, yeah, she did. Well, and this isn't part of the aggressive piece, but she also had, an accent, and that was off-putting as well.
The question that I'm going to ask is, does anything that you've brought up, are these, what does this have to do with leadership? What are the suggestions? I mean, we're promoting her into a leadership role. Why are the accent or the sort of ability to take a stand, why are those things we don't want to see in our leaders?
Well, I think you're making a leap there, Paul. It's not that I don't think that these can be in our leaders. It's just that, I thought this was a safe place for me to surface these concerns that I have, because I do,
It's
you
a
know,
very safe place, and that's why, if you know if you're bringing up these concerns, I just want to know why they are, how they are related to the culture or the standards that we want our leaders to embody. That's what I'm sort of confused by a little bit, Hugo.
Yeah, I second what Paul's saying, and also you used the word aggressive earlier, Hugo. I'm curious about that as well.
Mhm.
I would say that Denise is assertive. She's a great communicator. She works well with the team. She's a strong critical thinker. We've been piling a lot on her plate. She's been delivering above and beyond. So I think that she is very well qualified for it. But her style of communication that you're pointing out as aggressive reminds me a lot of Max on the team.
Oh yeah, Max. Max is great. Very confident. He's a great leader. Love working
Yeah,
with Max.
I mean, I think I'd like to hear more about Denise, and I think from what Maya's told me, I think she'd be, I think we should put this into further conversation, and sort of talk about what the next steps are for promoting her. And then Hugo, it just there's a disparity between the conversations that you're having about Max and, the comment you made about her accent really, that just doesn't quite feel like the culture we have here. Um, it doesn't feel like, if she's not inarticulate, she was presenting in front of an entire group and you were able to ask questions about it. I just want to make sure that that's sort of recognized. That's not, we would never hold someone back because of their accent. Um, and I think we can sort of go from there. Does that make sense for everyone?
Sure. I mean, I still have one other concern. Is this an appropriate time to bring it up?
Hugo, why don't we bring that up later? I just want to make sure, I'd sort of address that one-on-one, because the concerns you brought up so far, I don't think have been relevant to sort of the leadership principles that we're looking for, and so I just want to check that with you first, and then we can sort of, if it's addressable, we can bring it up. But let's talk about this privately first. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's a little bit of a personal opinion, or I mean, I want to look at her qualifications. This is a really important moment in her career.
Yeah.
I do think she is deserving of this promotion. So I want to honor that and make sure that we're talking about, professionally how she's qualified or any professional concerns.
Yeah, and Maya, you've worked with her more than anyone, so you should know. So let's pause simulation. Hey, Bennett.
Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for participating. Nice job. I'll go ahead and ask you the reflection questions. So first of all, how are you feeling emotionally after that conversation?
I'm feeling okay. I've seen this done quite a few times, and I've picked up a few tips and tricks on the way. But it does, it's a very uncomfortable situation.
Yes.
And how to handle Hugo, who transitions. He's really riding that line between microaggressing and macroaggressing,
Right.
and understanding, when to just say stop it, and when to sort of be, say like, hey, you can't say that. And so I don't know. It makes my palms sweat. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hugo was doing a lot of macro aggressing. I would agree with you in that conversation. Was just trying to rein him in and get him to, shine a light on his bias, which he clearly is not doing much reflecting on. So let me ask you, what's something you did that you thought went well?
I think I tried to sort of take command of the situation a little bit. I didn't want it to progress any farther than it did. I think I did a good job at sort of the call out function part of it, where I'll say like, hey, that's not our culture here. And sort of stopping Hugo from saying more than he needs to, and sort of not only damaging his relationship with Maya, but just stopping him in his tracks and making sure we can sort of have a chance later to sort of have a deeper conversation about things.
Yeah, like you said, because you were able to take a pause on that, as opposed to him expressing his other concern, which most likely was going to be another macro aggression. I mean, it's not that we don't want to hear what Hugo has to say, but really resetting what the parameters of this conversation is and the purpose. And I also would like to mention, I saw you doing that at the top, where Hugo wanted to jump in and talk about the concerns that he had, and you were trying to set up a different agenda of the way you wanted the meeting to go. And then Hugo was like, okay, but I have a concern. So he still,
he still
commandeered it over. Yeah, he definitely did. But it was a valiant try and a good intention there. And also getting Maya's perspective as well to see what her thoughts were. So it wasn't just about Hugo walking in the room, saying what he thought and then leaving. And then, Denise Garcia is not being truly considered, like given the consideration that she deserves after her hard work and how qualified she is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And if you were going to do it again, what's something you might do differently?
I think what I hearken to a little bit is I think there's sort of more opportunity for learning or self-reflection that I could have led Hugo down during that moment. But I just didn't have the questions ready in the moment to get him to sort of self-reflect a little bit. So.
That's a great insight, because being able to be curious and to ask him questions. He's talking about he enjoys Max. He thinks Max is confident and a great leader, but he's using coded language. He's looking at Denise as a woman of color differently, simply, and Max, it doesn't come out, but he's a white male. So he's looking at them very differently when they have very similar qualifications. So asking him questions, digging in around that might help Hugo, who again is not very reflective, obviously, and has a lot of work to do. So
yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, Paul. All right, you're free. You're out of the hot seat. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So that was our simulation. And we can sort of start having questions taken out. And I think we have 15 minutes remaining, but so I can sort of talk a little bit about how we're doing that similar work with some of our clients. And if I could, I don't see the share screen button. But that's all right.
Do you see it, Paul, in the bottom middle of the Zoom, the green button?
Oh,
Share screen?
there it is. Yeah, it showed up again. Thank you.
About 10 minutes, and then I'll hop
okay.
in when you want me for.
Great. So just to give sort of an example of, we've been doing this work with LinkedIn and then T-Mobile, where where they were doing very similar conversations to that, about how to have these equitable conversations, and we were doing this with 4,000 leaders in 2020. And so the scalability of having those avatars there, it is, and the consistency of having those avatars there is what really helps improve that practice. And then the same thing at T-Mobile, who has been doing sort of as a part of their carrier approach, has been doing some unbelievable DEI work. The average age of a T-Mobile frontline leader is younger than 25, and is normally their first leadership position. And so how do you lead, but also have these DEI conversations, where maybe someone comes to you and confesses that they have a mental health issue, and how do you set expectations and be empathetic, and sort of be, and how do you sort of use the common D&I language to have a fruitful conversation while also being a business leader, was something that they're really worried about, and is one of our long-standing customers in D&I. So that's sort of my presentation. And Charlene, do we have any questions?
We do. I am hopping back in.
Right.
So thank you, Paul. And we actually, a few comments to mention before I jump right into questions.
Yeah.
A lot of positive feedback. People are saying the simulation was really awesome. Love it. Very impressive. This is great. Lots of exclamation points. So I wanted to make sure to share that. Obviously, the technology is impressive, but this, the content is also just as important. I think that this is happening in real life. So I want to also mention, let me jump into the questions, but I wanted you to see the happy notes there. Okay. Someone had asked, is captioning available?
Yes, so captioning is available, and that's one of the things that we've been working on a lot, to be more inclusive. And so the good news is Mursion is a standalone software, but it also integrates seamlessly with Zoom, which has built-in closed captioning. And so we can use that, and also Google Hangouts as closed captioning. And so there's lots of different technical ways to work with our people that are hard of hearing. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question here. Do larger organizations use this? How do they measure success, and what is their feedback? Yeah,
so that's a really interesting question. So larger organizations do this. So for example, LinkedIn, T-Mobile, we're doing this with 2,000, 4,000 of their leaders and learners. The way that Mursion can sort of measure success is dependent on two things. One is we can evaluate learners sort of post simulation, and we can evaluate them on how they are completing those. You saw those objectives that I had on that scenario slide before I went to the demo. We can evaluate people on those objectives, sort of A, B, give them a grade even, or say they passed these 3 objectives. The other way, if you're looking for more robust information, is by doing surveys before and after, or sort of walking through with the organization how to utilize the data they already know about their employees' soft skills and competence, and then measure them before and after immersion simulation, or before and after a training program, to understand their ROI. So What we generally see, is that 95% of the learners feel more confident after going through a simulation, even if it can be a little challenging or traumatizing. But these scenarios can be traumatizing in real life too. So it's all about that really good practice. So.
Well, that leads into Paul. Why do you use avatars?
Yeah, and so that's a really good question. What we found is that avatars are easier to speak to than a real person. So if you've just learned a lot of new vocabulary about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you're trying to be a good ally, you're trying to speak out, you're trying to speak faithfully to the inclusion programs at your company, it's really hard to do that if you're role playing with your boss, if you're role playing with the coworker, especially if say you're both white and you're trying to role play a POC scenario. That's very, very challenging. That's very, very difficult to do, and really get real authentic practice. So avatars provide that opportunity to have real practice while also feeling safe enough where you're able to use something that you've just learned. That's sort of the main learner benefit. On an organizational benefit, if you're talking about ROI, you're talking about learning, keeping things consistent and equitable for your learners, we can scale that same scenario to thousands of learners. And there's not a significant difference between what any different learner is getting, but they all have the freedom to go about that scenario the way they want. So that's avatars. And the research shows that avatars, people are learning faster than comparable methods such as peer-to-peer role play or even professional role play. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Let me squeeze in a couple more. We have a couple minutes left here. Kimberly is asking, you were going to say why you use avatars instead of the actual actor. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So what we saw there is we saw, and there's also a cost savings benefit of it as well. Everything you saw today was one actor. It wasn't three actors playing Bennett and one playing Maya and one playing Hugo. It was one actor that was able to play all three, which allows Mursion to create very diverse scenarios with very little manpower needed behind it. Whereas if you were trying, for example, we started as a teacher training program, and one of the great things is that we can create a classroom of children. And if you're trying to get a classroom of children, what's the acting phrase? Like, I refuse to work with animals and children, right? It's having those avatars or having multi-avatars allows us to play roles that we would never be able to play without them. And not only just it allows us to play 2 or 3 people in a room at the same time, and we only need one person on the back end. So.
Wow, very interesting. I had no idea that was one person.
Yeah. No, they're if you're talking about like who's the most talented people at our company, it's always the actors, with like hands down, because they're playing 4 or 5 people, sometimes 4 or 5 children at the same time. So yeah.
Takes a special skill.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. We're at time.